Hello and welcome to this video on STEEPL and SWOT analysis. STEEPL is also known as PESTLE. What we're doing here with this analysis is we're taking a SWOT analysis and we're using the inputs from STEEPL to help us establish more of the criteria for our SWOT analysis. So just as a recap, if you haven't done SWOT analysis before, what we're doing is we're looking at an organization, a person, or any sort of entity and mapping it against these four attributes. Let's take, for example, an organization. These are the things that the organization does well. So if we were looking at it as a unique value proposition that the organization brings because they have certain strengths in an industry, meaning they are very good at what they do, better than their competitors, then we'll classify that as a strength. So they can capitalize on these strengths and make money by leveraging those. Weaknesses are the things that the organization doesn't do well. And one thing to note with these is these are internal. So these are within the bounds of the organization. The organization can control these, they can manipulate these and work on these within their organization. You can leverage your strengths to make more money, to find more opportunities, or you can shore up weaknesses. If there's an area that the organization isn't doing well, but they're looking at a strategic objective to move into a certain market, then they may need to add capabilities to their workforce or to their overall skill set to make that a reality. On the other side, we have opportunities and threats. Opportunities are those external things that we may take our strengths and leverage against them. But if there's an opportunity that strategically the business wants to take on, then we may have to look at some of the weaknesses of the business and say, do we have the capability to take on those opportunities, and then increase the capabilities therefore. Threats are those, just say a competitor as an example, that is moving into the market space where perhaps this company had a monopoly on the value that they were bringing to the market for that particular service or product. Now there's another group that's coming in and they're making inroads on the market, and this is looking as a threat to the organization. Okay, so the threats and opportunities are something that are external, and being external, these are outside of the control of the organization. The organization is best to find ways to leverage, or in the sense of opportunities, or mitigate in the sense of threats. Now let's put this together. We are going to look at an example of the Bering Strait passage. Now the Bering Strait is a waterway that links Alaska over to Russia. And there's always been talks about bridging this gap that goes between the two continents. And there are benefits of doing this. There also is a lot of, when we come to our SWOT, there are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of problems that we need to solve in order to make that a reality. But also a part of this is this a viable, at this point in time, is this a viable project that governments would want to take on? And I do say governments. I don't believe this is just a corporation that can take this on at this point in time. And we'll get into the STEEPL analysis and map that in and explore some of these questions. Now I'm going to say I don't have all the answers to this. This is just an example that I want to bring to light so that we can take a look at these two tools and see how they work for this particular example. So we're going to take this from the point of being an engineering firm, and just say this engineering firm is a multinational engineering firm. They have a lot of the best talent. So one of the strengths I want to put in, if we take a look at this engineering firm, let's call it Acme Engineering. Now let's say one of the strengths is we have some of the best engineers, best structural engineers. Now let's start getting into the STEEPL analysis on this. STEEPL analysis is also the PESTLE analysis. So I'm just going to go through this in a different order. If you're used to PESTLE, then by all means use PESTLE. Just understand that for the sake of this exercise, I'm just going to go through the STEEPL sequence. So the first is social. So let's put it into context of our Bering Strait passage, and if we were to attempt to build this bridge, what are some of the social impacts that we have to look at for this project? And we'll just take as an example, for social, if you go to Google Maps and you take a look at this aerial, you'll see that it is very sparsely populated. So if we need to get a specialized workforce into that area, we're only dealing with maybe a few thousand people that are in that area, and they're mostly native people. They don't have the skills as far as building a structure that's going to span the size of the Bering Strait. So one of the impacts we need to look at is for this project, I know we're looking at this as an engineering firm, but what I'd also like to look at is one of the weaknesses. If I were to take social and map this in, we're going to look at the skill set, and I'm going to call it laborer skill set. We may have the best engineering team, but we lack the ability to actually execute on this. And what this means is we may have to ship in, if we were to go into options on the solution, so we'd have to ship in skilled labor to actually complete this specialized project. The other social implication that we can look at is we're potentially going through native land. So one of the threats is, and I'm going to call it a threat. Now we're not saying this as there's going to be an uprising or people are going to cause some sort of disorder to the project. What I want to say as threats is this is something that we have to acknowledge, that we are potentially looking at the livelihood of Indigenous people, and to make sure that we have the appropriate conversations to make sure that they're included in the project and they're agreeable to the project. I'm going to mark this as native land. I'm going to call it native land rights, so I am jumping ahead a bit. I'm going to mark that as being a social thing, but that also falls into a legal framework that we may have to discuss. So let's move on to the next part of our STEEPL analysis, and this is technology. So to make this project happen, we have to look at the overall technology set that we would need in order to span this area, this geographic area. And if we look at the train technology that we have, if trains are running through here or vehicles are running through this particular passage, then we can agree that a strength that we have is, and I'll map this out to here, that the technology exists right now. So the technology exists for the land vehicles, but where we may have a weakness is if we look at the actual structure itself and what we're up against. And the question that we need to ask is, do we have the applicable technology to put this sort of structure, a land bridge or a tunnel, through this particular area? And some of the information that I read says, yes, we can put a tunnel through the area. The rock foundation is stable. Let's assume that the technology exists for tunnel. However, the bridge is going to be a different concern. So as threats is bridge. And I'll qualify the bridge in just a moment here. Let's move on to the first E of STEEPL, which is going to be economic. When we mention the economic impacts of this particular project. One of the biggest things that we're looking at is the ability to move freight by land across this passage. And one of the things to note is if we were to move this by sea, so let me draw this out. Okay, so if we were to move this commodity, then here we have a container vessel, and that container vessel is in the water, okay? And what I'm showing with this diagram is simply that if this were to be the Pacific Ocean, we then need to move cargo across the Pacific Ocean, but this requires a loading. So we're going from land, okay? So if we were in China, for example, then we're going to load our materials onto our ocean vessel, and then when it reaches port in North America, we're going to unload, so from sea to land. And this takes up quite a bit of time. First of all, a train vehicle that's moving across the passage can move far faster than an ocean-going vessel. The other part is we have to wait at the terminals for the exchange of the materials from going from port to the vessel, from the vessel back to the port or back onto land. If we were to go through a train system, then we're loading the materials once, and then the train moves to the area in, let's just say through Russia, and then they can offload the cargo at whatever depot that the train arrives. So let's look at, so economic on this, just to summarize our economic piece, is, say, faster transit. And I'll put the other point as a fewer transfers. So we have an opportunity here to realize the economic gain through faster material delivery time, and this should come to be a significant cost benefit looking at the amount of trade that is crossing the Pacific Ocean between Asia and North America, for example. To put a lot of this through a train route could make a lot of economic sense. Now, this is very high level. There's some detail that we have to get into to make sure that the numbers do add up. However, there is one economic weakness, that we have no carrier capable of actually moving the material through the part of Alaska and then down through Russia. So I'm going to mark this infrastructure improvements as a threat. Now, it's not necessarily a weakness for an engineering team that's building a project. By marking this down, what I'm doing is I'm earmarking this for a conversation to have later. Now, it may be, depending on the overall scope of this, because I am putting in a couple of things here, is I'm looking at the engineering, but also talking about the overall project as a whole. So looking at the project as a whole, that we want to make sure that the infrastructure improvements that we need are to build a rail line up through Alaska and then another rail line down through the part of Russia so that we connect the two markets. Right now, those don't exist. As far as I know, they don't exist right now from the reading that I've done. There's a spend that needs to happen for both governments to bring the infrastructure up to the passage point, build the actual passage project, and then link those to the particular markets. Moving on to the next, we are going to look at environmental. For the project in general, there is another threat we need to look at, and that is the one of when we have environmental, we're looking at an area of the world that has a lot of ice flow. The engineering team in this particular case will need to examine how the ice flows and builds up. So if I had a bridge and we have our structural components that are going into the water, so if I were to draw it like this, okay. Now in the winter time, we're going to get a lot of ice flow, so this water is going to build up into ice. And that ice is going to put stresses on the bridge pylons. And this is one of the engineering problems that has to be solved. How are we going to protect these pylons against these forces that are going to be impacting on them? So that's what I mean by the threats of the ice flow. If it's a tunnel, for example, from what I read, if we're going under the rock structure, so here's the rock structure, and we're putting a tunnel underneath the rock structure where our trains are going to be moving, or the question I'm going to present here is, do we have a risk of tectonic motion, of the earth plates moving in such a way that we are going to see fractures or breakdown of the tunnel? Now again, this is something that I would have geologist experts take a look at. We have to see if this sits between tectonic plates, or is it sitting within its own plate, and these are very stable rock structures that we can dig through. So let's move on to P, which is political. Now another threat that we have to look at with this project, and on the flip side, this could be an opportunity. So this is one of the things that it's in a balance. Completing a project of this stature would be a very big boon to international cooperation between North America and Asia, specifically the USA and Russia. So if we were to take, as the time of this recording, which is the end of 2016, there is some rhetoric going on between the USA and Russia. Now, political stuff aside, as far as looking at businesses, and in my own opinion, is there's a lot of opportunity here for nations to work together to shake hands and do business. As far as the rhetoric is concerned, for me, and this is a personal opinion, I find that it's a lot of noise when looking at a project like this, where we can bring a lot of cooperation, a lot of potential economic benefit together, so that we all, in general, benefit from a project of this stature. And if done right, this is something that could last for many generations and be one of these hallmark projects that is a turning point in our global village, if I were to use that term. So on the political side, there is a threat that there is this rhetoric that there could potentially be breakdowns or sanctions, but let's look at from the opportunity side that there's a lot of chance for international cooperation with a project like this, and it is going to require a lot of cooperation because of the amount of money that is going to be needed in order to make this project a reality. And then let's move on to legal frameworks. And I was alluding to this earlier by looking at the native land rights. So we have to look at treaties that respective countries have made with their native populations, and then ask, can we build this sort of infrastructure project through these areas? Now let me get my notebook out. I was taking some notes while researching this particular project, and this project would go from Wales, Alaska. So if you take Google Maps, you can see how the area of the Bering Strait that would go between Wales, Alaska, through the Diomede Islands, and then to, it looks like Navkon, Russia. So pardon me if I don't have that absolutely correct here. But the Diomede Islands, it looks like there's an Eskimo or Inuit population that is there. Being in Canada, I use the term Inuit. I don't know what the specific treaties are that these indigenous people have. So for the potential threats, we would look at, on the legal side, we look at native land rights. Also, there might be other legal frameworks or treaties between the countries that we'd have to look at. And we got a couple lenses when we're looking at trade treaties. Are the trade treaties positioned in such a way that it creates an opportunity that by accessing certain stipulations of the treaty that we get potentially some economic benefits, or that there's money that is available by virtue of stipulations of the treaty? Or is it a threat that if we were to open this different channel for moving goods across the continents, that we're infringing against a right of potentially, if there's an ocean passage stipulation in the treaty where there's a certain amount of volume that needs to move across the ocean. Now, I'm saying this because I don't know. Again, for us as analysts, we need to bring these questions to light and make sure that we are asking them of the appropriate experts so that we get a good, clear picture of what this project is going to entail. In summary, this was a look at using a SWOT analysis and the STEEPL analysis. We were using the STEEPL analysis to input into our SWOT analysis. And by virtue of this conversation, now there's no right or wrong answers here, but what we're attempting to do is to facilitate a conversation where we can talk about these parts of the project, take these as conversation points, and then map them into our SWOT analysis. And what I'm finding through having this conversation, that we're going beyond what just one engineering team will do. So we're going to need members of parliament and government leaders to get in and on this conversation as well. Because if we're going to build something as large and complex as the Bering Strait Passage, then there's a whole other level of cooperation that is needed. Thank you for joining me in this video on the SWOT analysis and the STEEPL analysis. If there's other analysis techniques that you'd like me to go over and bring some examples for you, please let me know in the comments, and then I can create a video for you to help you out with those specific analysis techniques. Also, let me know if there's some subject matter that you want me to go over, and then I can create videos for that. Thank you, and see you in the next video.